everybody. I am Denis Dyack, CEO, founder of Apocalypse Studios, here with Jack, who's got a Canadian flag in the background. Jack is our narrative designer, doing other things, but happy to we delayed this by a week because he's now in Canada. Welcome.
Yeah, we it had to get put off because, needless to say, crossing the border during a pandemic right now is no easy task. It was chaotic, but I'm here. I've got internet. I've got everything's running right now. It's a little cold, so I'm warmed up and just
Ironically, it's actually not cold in Niagara. It's 31 degrees, but apparently the air conditioner, you share AC with someone, and it's really, really cold in your apartment right now. It's actually 31 degrees outside, which is like over 100 in Fahrenheit.
I'm under house arrest for 2 more days for the self-quarantine. It'll be the end of my period. So I've not yet really got to see much of Canada except for this basement. But in 2 days, I'm going to roam around, and I can't wait. Freedom.
Well, you are in Niagara-on-the-Lake, which is one of the most beautiful areas in Niagara, Virgil, Niagara-on-the-Lake, which is the old capital of Canada. And during that is why, I don't know if you know the background to this, that's why how the White House got its name, because of all the stuff that happened with Niagara-on-the-Lake in the War of 1812. Do you know the background on that?
I don't know.
It's very interesting. So I'm a history buff, of course, and so during the War of 1812, where there was a war between the U.S. and Canada, this all happened because back then we were still part of the British Empire, and it was basically the U.S. versus the British, and we were Canada, but not quite Canada yet. We weren't independent, and the Napoleonic Wars were going on during this time. So the British pulled all their troops out of Canada and to fight Napoleon. So then a war started here, and I guess we burnt down the White House, and they had to build it back up and paint it white because it was all burnt and stuff like that. Then you guys came to Niagara-on-the-Lake and burnt it to the ground. And then we moved our capital. We're like, okay, this is too close to the border. So we moved our capital to Ottawa, where it wasn't as close to the border. But Niagara-on-the-Lake is totally beautiful. It's an amazing place. And it's hard to believe that a war actually took place between Canada and the U.S. We're so close now, but that happened. So yeah. But history and things like that, I think, are good for storytelling. And I think that's sort of a good basis for us to kind of kick off on where we're going with Deadhaus Sonata and a lot of the research we're doing. This is, of course, our narrative stream, and we want to talk about where we're going with our other streams. We've got a lot to talk about, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about history, anthropology, how it works into story. I know, Jack, you have a lot of topics you want to cover with story and narrative. But let's talk about the new streams and how we've restructured everything. We really, I guess we've been talking for a while, and we really felt that the streams needed to be more focused on Deadhaus Sonata and more content oriented, correct?
Yeah, so we've got kind of a structure set up now so that each of our departments is going to be feeding the comms team development content through a pipeline that will shed some light on actual things that are being developed in the game. You get a new art asset somebody's particularly proud of. You get a snippet of somebody showing you how they rigged a certain thing, how it moves. All of this is going to feed into the comms. They'll tweet out and put on Facebook little snippets, little teasers of it. And then it'll be one of the, I believe currently we're looking at 4 streams a month. One of those 4 will be those kind of content things. One of them will be this. One of them will be eventually gameplay. we're going to have workable builds that we're going to be showing off before too long.
Right. So the idea is, and I think this first few weeks, we're going to hold off on streams till we get what we think. The idea was we wanted to reduce the quantity and increase the quality, and we wanted to refocus on Deadhaus Sonata. I think the actual gameplay and playing the builds probably not going to come till October-ish. I think is probably around the right time, maybe November, depending on how we feel about the build. And we've been showing various screenshots off of it here and again, but we really want to make sure that it's in the place that we want. There's so much to talk about in so much detail, but we're going to start showing off concepts of the darker art direction that we're going, and it's pretty dark. We're going to show animation, how we're looking at making the classes very asymmetrical. We're also gonna show thanks Ian for hosting us. We're also gonna show various rigging and technical areas. So sometimes the streams are just gonna be an artist working away on something in Lumberyard or in Maya or Max. So for those who are interested, could see, I guess, how the sausage is made. And I don't know if that's going to be of interest for a lot of people, but we're going to find out. We really want to give everyone deep insight into the game. We still are early in development, but it's going to start to pick up now. We're going to start to pick up steam pretty soon. We've got a very, very busy year ahead, and there's a lot to roll out. I don't know, Jack, if I missed anything there, please add to it.
No, yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. It's essentially a new streaming strategy, and it'll be it's kicking into gear already, and the content queue is starting to build up, and we'll soon have a nice little groove, a nice little flow of content out to you guys, and I think people will be interested. I saw, as we were talking about some of these, I saw somebody say "yay" in the chat.
Faceless Mike, yeah. Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit in the after parties, and I think moving to weekly Wednesday streams, a lot of the time, I don't know, things are, if not already, getting pretty crazy, as you've seen, Jack. Now that you've joined the company, you can see how busy it gets. I don't know how often I'll be able to join the streams, but certainly yourself and Jalen will be around a lot more, and as well as some of the other team members. And we want to be as transparent as possible. And at the same time, there's just so many interesting things that we're doing that I think people would really like. Whether it's deep social media integration, directions and story, gameplay, some of the skill system I'm so excited about. I guess we'll be rolling that out in a couple months when we can actually show it in gameplay. But I think I haven't seen anything like it. I think it's pretty cool. I think people will be excited about it. But there's so many other things that we're going to be showing, correct?
Yeah, and can we mention the little Chronicles thing?
Yeah. I don't see why not.
There's for those of you familiar with the Chronicles of the Grand Inquisitor, that you read them, we're going to have some videos coming up that they'll be narrated. They'll be given voice by whoever is to voice Alaric von Beller, as if he's kind of, dictating his journal, and it's going to have some kind of visual supplementation in the background that's very sketchy. I don't want to, maybe pencil, maybe paint, but very kind of rough sketch type pictures as it goes along, and we've got some cool ideas for that'll be coming later too.
Yeah, the idea is to show the direction of all the classes. So I know so far we've shown off a few of the classes and artwork on the website. So we'll be doing vignettes on that are based off of the Chronicles of the Grand Inquisitor, which will continue. We'll be adding more to those eventually, but we're going to put voices to that. It's going to be like, I would like to see them like a radio show, so you get voice acting with it, as well as showing off the direction of each class and how they're going to be different. And I have, and both Jack and I have been able to see the direction that we're going, and it is quite dark. It's very different. All I can say is this: I don't know, was it about 2 months ago, Jack, where we just went, we're just tired of trying to please the masses. How's this going to sell in China? We just don't care. We're making something that we want to make, and it's probably not going to sell in China simply because we have a game about the undead. Undead doesn't go over there well, and the character classes are going to look, frankly, monstrously beautiful. They're going to be nasty, I think is how you described them once, Jack. I think that's a great way of describing them.
Beautiful, yes. Leaning into the horror elements, really getting to do something that's not done that much in the gaming industry, especially in bigger companies. There's kind of a fear. There's kind of a design by committee style where, and I've sat in on these meetings in other companies, and they go, "Oh, we got to be careful that what if this?" They basically try to appeal to the broadest audience available, which makes sense from a purely industrial point of view. Let's say you're pumping out widgets. But something is lost in that style of design. It kind of flattens out the terrain of possibility, creatively speaking. And one thing that I can say that lets me know for sure we're onto something here is that the artists who are involved in this, who are very talented, all the time are telling us how excited they are. They're like, we don't ever get to work on something like this. Everything has to be safe. Everything has to have the edges rounded off, and we get this has a really clear direction and a really clear voice behind it, and it gets us pumped up. Where one of them told me the other day, as I'm drawing, as I'm designing this character, I find myself speaking aloud in what I think his voice would be like from the lines that I've read that he said in the stories. So I'm like, okay, so people, what we're doing, people are getting into it. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, the best way I like to describe it is there is a feeling that you get when you think you are onto something, and I can only, this is a guarantee of absolutely nothing, but I can say this: when I've seen it in both Eternal Darkness and in Blood Omen Legacy of Kain, actually no other games that I've worked on, where I get this feeling of this is so different and unpredictable that it's going to, whether it's a super hit or not, that's one thing, but this game is going to leave an impression. It will make an impact in the industry. And from that standpoint, that's all you can ever really ask for. Some of the things that we're working on and some of the narrative, which I think is a good place for us to jump into. Our goal is, it was like, I'll explain it like this. When I first started talking about, these are similar feelings, and I don't want to give too much away, but we're working on some stuff right now where our partners are like, we don't know, we've never seen this before. We've never seen anyone do this. We're not sure what it's going to be like. And then people start interacting back and forth. What about this? What about that? What about this? The last time something like that happened is when I was working with Mr. Miyamoto in Japan, and I started explaining how the sanity effects were going to work. And he said, Dennis, please understand, you're telling people that you're deleting their game. And if they're going to be deleting their game, what if they take their GameCube and they throw it against the wall and break it? We're technically responsible for that. Does that mean we have to buy new GameCubes for everybody? And I remember sitting back and thinking and going, that's quite true. It's very possible. I don't know how this is going to go with these sanity effects. No one's done them before, but I'll tell you this, they will remember it. Gamers will remember this. And I think the feeling that we're getting now, Jack, as we explore these things and as we, like looking at some of the concepts for the vampires, they're just they're just nasty. And I just love it. I just can't wait to roll that stuff out. And that's the tip of the iceberg of some of the things we're doing. Some of the things where people go, I don't know, no one's ever done this before. and our skill system. When I look at it, I look at our skill system, and we were going to take the traditional approach of, okay, let's just, so many different things in this game right now. Let's just play it safe. Let's do something that just built upon the shoulders of giants. Let's not be too radical. Then we come up with this radical idea, and it's too good to walk away from. I'm like, this is awesome. We have to do this. And people are like, well, are they going to like it? And people are like, I don't know. We've never seen this before. So it's a very good feeling. I hope that these streams will echo these feelings and help spread the word, because right now I think our one of our goals is to start showing more of the game, spreading the word about Deadhaus Sonata. I see all these games coming out, all these launch games, and frankly, they're just so generic, and it's just, when someone says, oh, we're going to do this, it's so revolutionary, and I just look at it and I'm like, that's what every game's done for like the last 20 years. And maybe we're too different, and maybe we're going to be not mainstream enough. I don't know. All I can say is that I love it. And that's, when you're making entertainment, if you please at least one person, which is yourself, that's a guarantee you're going to be happy. You can't guarantee you're going to please anyone else. So one of the golden rules, of course.
Yeah, people know enough to know that is a marketing buzzword. They know it's something worth promising because they know people want that. That's why they say, oh, we're revolutionary, we're innovative, we're trendsetters, etc. But then there's a counter tension from just other elements, let's say, within the industry that pushes against that. That wants to play it safe. And that's not specific to the gaming industry. That's any entertainment at all. They see something that's successful and they want to emulate that. And no one wants to take risk, essentially.
We have certainly terrified a lot of people. There are some people who love it, but there's some people who are just terrified. They look at what we're doing and I could just tell. They're calculating in the back of their mind, and like, these guys are insane. Yeah. And I'm like, did I say that out loud? I guess we're going to have to mute that at some point. That was a very bad word. Never used to swear until Jack joined the company.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, well, my apologies, everyone. We'll try to keep this family friendly. So anyway, this is probably a good time to jump off, but let's answer a question. I know we have one from Sundowner. It says, is Deadhaus Sonata like a country government, or more like a military alignment between different undead clans, factions, or governments?
I would say there's a little bit of dualism in here, right? There's a top-down authoritarian structure within Deadhaus that is imposed. Well, you'll see mentioned in bits of the lore, in some of the class descriptions, you'll see a figure named Nagaztak mentioned. He's also referred to as the Black Hand. He's the Revenant King of Deadhaus, and I think of him in a historical context similarly as I think about the effect that really powerful rulers like Genghis Khan had, where you had these kind of disparate factions and tribes, like the people of the steppes in Genghis Khan's case. And up until a certain point, they were alongside each other or in conflict, but never unified. And a really powerful leader comes along and unifies all of them. So there still remain these kinds. So a good example of this would be vampires, for example. If you go to our website and you go into the vampire class description, it talks about how they've been around forever. No one knows for how long. They've been around long before Deadhaus. And historically, they operated in a solitary way, typically. They're kind of solitary predators staking out their claims and their territories. It was not until, and they were, of course, in conflict with the living, and it was always a give and take. And when Nagaztak came along and he unified them, most of them, more numbers than ever had been under a single banner, they became the war between man and them just totally tipped in favor. Totally. So, but they retain some of their elements. So vampires can be thought of as somewhat subversive within Deadhaus and calculating and there's a lot of intrigue and political, and that's of course very different to the way revenants would behave, and very different to the way ghouls would behave. So they are very much their own, driven by their own motivations entities, but they are all controlled by this incredibly powerful leader. Hopefully that answers the yeah.
Yeah, I think, and just to add to that, I totally agree. A house is like a government structure, except it has connotations of you're in a family, and what that means is it's both positive and powerful. Is that you're part of the family, you're a pivotal part of this, and it's a governmental structure where everyone's entwined very deeply, and betrayal um, will, especially from within, will do a lot of damage. And a lot of the old structures, especially with feudalism, when we look into historical accuracy of, I guess, historical foundations of what we're going to be building upon, danger from within, particularly with the Vikings, when we did a lot of research into human, the whole Norse mythology was all based upon betrayal from within is the biggest fear, because they felt outside forces, just the Vikings, when they were invading Britain, they just thought, yeah, everyone was so soft. They would just walk into churches and take all these riches, and they were like, "Who are these people?" And at the same time, they wanted to settle. So the house structure itself is both governmental and at the same time deeply seated in we're a family, and you have to remember that you can never betray the family. I think that's how I don't know, Jack, if you completely agree with that, but that's kind of how I see the sort of structure of what we're going, sort of a very feudalistic, medieval structure on these nations.
Yeah, and the name house plays into that fairly well for understanding the structure. And you know
Yep.
each of these, they kind of divided by, if you want to call them species, loosely speaking. Uh, and some of them had their own organizations prior to Deadhaus, and some of them were solitary, but they are now united for the most part within Deadhaus. I'm sure there are undead that are outside of Deadhaus, undoubtedly. Uh, and that sets up a lot of interesting potential for conflicts, potential for recruitment, etc. But for the most part, yeah.
Agreed. Okay, we have one from Golden Zen, and then from there, I'm gonna have you kick it off and to talk about some of the subjects you want to talk about. Golden Zen is, hey, Golden Zen, thanks for joining us. By the way, it's good to see you here. Why did the undead never try to invade the capital? See, he's going right into the lore. So Golden Zen is so hardcore into the history. There's such a deep history of where we're going with this. But Jack, why don't you take it from there? But
So
there's a lot to be.
Are we allowed to kind of go into that a little bit?
I think we're allowed to go into whatever we want. I guess moving forward, we have done a lot of effort and research. So I guess what I'll throw out there, this is a very hardcore small audience. And for now, be prepared. It could be some spoilers, but we're happy to talk about it. As I hope at some point, I know I see some streams getting like 10,000 people per stream. We're clearly not there yet. At that point, I'd be very afraid of, spoiling everything. But because we're such a tight knit group right now, it does feel like a family. I think, Jack, we just talk to the level that you feel comfortable, because I can't read your mind. So just go into what you think is reasonable.
Okay, I would say this is more a question of motivation than will, partly. There is Deadhaus is a complicated entity. It's not motivated simply by, let's say, world domination or inexorable antagonism toward the living. It has its own specific goals, and where those goals come into conflict with the living, then they come into conflict with the living. But where they do not, they do not. So if it were a matter of Deadhaus existed to crush all of mankind, that's what they would be trying to do. But that isn't their primary purpose. And there are, of course, individual motivations within Deadhaus, and some of those individual motivations. If you think about the different kinds of undead, for example, some of them are more naturally. Some of them are predators to humans. Vampires, for example, predators to humans. Liches, not so much. A lich has a very different set of motivations than a vampire does. So it's made up of many bodies, some of which are naturally antagonistic to men, some of which aren't. Obviously, if they completely wiped mankind out, that would be a problem. Certainly be a problem for vampires. So it's a combination of complex motivations in relation to mankind, and also the overarching goal, which that we will keep secret, which is simply not to crush and overrun mankind.
Yeah, I think the way I would describe it is to take on a metaphor, and I apologize if this is a bad metaphor, but it would be like an MMA fighter taking on a toddler. The mortal humans do not have the capacity to truly fight Deadhaus. Deadhaus is overwhelmingly more powerful from not only the physical realm, but both the spiritual and the essential realm. They're at an entirely different level. So our story, I know that, I guess that's one of the ways in which we're different too. A lot of people will be like mankind versus the undead. But if you look at Memento Mori, our bell tolls for all. They're going to die anyway. They're all coming to Deadhaus. So there's no rush for them to deal with humanity. And a humanity story in the Deadhaus Sonata universe is very complicated. And it's going to take on, it's a 15-year arc, what we have planned. So it's very detailed. I guess it's kind of like our Malazan Book of the Fallen for video games. And we're taking this very seriously. We're spending a lot of time. We're working, as Jack said, working with a lot of people who seem to be equally as inspired as we are. And we're trying to create a narrative that doesn't talk down to anyone, we're not trying to preach to anyone. We're telling a story. And we think that we'll be focusing on truth and what is the meaning of truth. And so we're going to be asking what I would call some exceedingly difficult philosophical questions that are not easily answered. And just by getting people to think about these things, I think allows for a mental catharsis and hopefully some learning. I know I've learned a lot just by working on this title. And my opinions, as it reflects on real society today with COVID and all the crazy stuff that's going on, I think so far we're walking in a direction that should appeal to all who want to listen. And again, to be clear, we're not trying to. Some people who don't care about story, I don't know what will fit. They'll probably like it, but they'll be like, "Where's the action?" And in China was China's kind of a write-off for us. So we love China from the Chinese people perspective, of course. But all the politics and stuff going, it's just not something we want to take on. We've got some messages that we think go beyond those things, that really address core concepts with humanity and truth, and talk about why we're on this planet, which I think need to be answered in these stressful times. So hopefully people find that interesting.
Yeah, that's a good segue into a couple of things. It reminded me. It's very important to emphasize, and I'm sure the people here know this, we are a story-driven game. That is such an important component of this. You'd be surprised how little emphasis is placed on that within the industry as a whole. Some of you, I'm sure. Even internally, I've heard discussions about, well, Path of Exile was given as an example, and those developers, they take metrics of their players' actions, and people just speed through the story. So, what is the weight of story really when so many people skip it? But no, for us, it weighs it. It drives it. I mean, anyone who's played any of Diak's earlier games knows this by a good example.
Well, I think that's an interesting topic. I'll answer it this way: Path of Exile is the best story that no one ever listens to. But I don't think it's got to do with the quality of the story. I think the quality of the story is quite good. I think it's the medium in which they portray it. They're putting out text. I just don't care. Or they have some isometric camera angle where there's a bunch of like stick figures, like me, doing a cinema. That sucks. And that's what I would forward. That's why no one cares about the story. But if you actually do something that's on the level of The Witcher, which is what we're trying to do, where you have engaging cinema with uses the language of cinema, where you have upshots and close, medium, far shots, establishing shots, that's a big difference. And I think generally we have some advantage. One is that I'm pretty old. I guess I'm a dinosaur now, but the medium is the message, and understanding the medium of video games is quite important. And the grinding gear guys, which I love, and they're making tons of money, and certainly this is not a criticism per se, but maybe a constructive analysis. Maybe people aren't listening to the story because of the way the story is being told, not because of the story itself. And that's what we're going to try to take on in Deadhaus. And we've got, on top of that, because my background is computer science, we're going to be diving into some pretty crazy stuff of procedural generation, big data, persistent universes, all of which, imagine if you're a vampire and you go to a town and you not only name the town, but you leave some siblings there for other people to explore. What does that mean for the plot? What does that do for the narrative? These are the kind of things we're going to explore.
And anyone who wondered if that meant what it sounds like it means, yes, I think there will be ways in which to sire progeny as a vampire, for example. But this is a good segue into one of the topics that I wanted to talk about. Video games is a unique medium for delivering story, and yeah, I think the way it's delivered is really important, and blocks of text simply just doesn't resonate with the medium. Voice is one way to do it better. And there are all kinds of ways you can tell stories mechanically. You can tell stories visually, and you can do storytelling methods, and the way that they can be expressed in video games fascinates me. One of the really important elements of ours and the way that we'll be telling ours is choice. So you undoubtedly, those listening, have seen examples of this before in story-driven games. You can think Dragon Age, Mass Effect, things like that, where you have essentially dialogue wheels, and you have to decide things, whether to kill this person or not to kill this person, for example. Choice is going to play a big role in Deadhaus Sonata, but I have very strong feelings about choice because this is, again, like innovation and setting trends and things like this. Game companies know enough to know that this is something that people want, and so they will promise it to get people interested, but a lot of times the execution is not quite there. So a lot of times the choices that they'll put in, yes, Faceless Mike just said choice, not just the illusion of choice. The illusion of choice we want to avoid. Where, for example, one of the games that was very ambitious with what it tried to do with story, and it did a lot of it really well. And I have a lot of praise for it, but it did fall short in some areas. It was an MMO, a Star Wars MMO called Knights of the Old Republic. Did some really cool story stuff. They had a lot of choices that were entirely superfluous. You'd pick up a quest, and someone would go over there and kill 13 badgers for me, or whatever the example was. And you would, if for some reason, they would give you a dialogue wheel answer that would be like, okay, and then, yeah, I'll do that. And then, like 3 ways to say, sure, I'll take it. Or, oddly enough, sometimes ways to say no, but you'd still get the quest. Like, hey, go kill these cultists in this temple for me. Nah, you're dumb. And then the person giving the quest would be like, how dare you insult me? You'll find the cultists in room B, and we're like, what? You could just say whatever, and he'll still just give it to you. So we wanna play with that, especially like there'd be sometimes these supposedly really dangerous evil Sith, and they'd be mad, and they'd go, "Oh, this is what we want you to go do for me," and you could just like troll them to their face and be like, "I'm not gonna do that," and your face is dumb, and they would go, "Uh, how dare you disrespect me?" And then just keep going. I'm like, they should blow my head up if I pick that option. Like, I would like to see there to be consequences to because people just fly through some of this stuff, but I'd like you to have to pay attention and to think about and remember what did this one tell me about? I remember that guy in the town mentioned this artifact that he's talking about and kind of put. Eventually, everyone's gonna have guides for this stuff up online, right? But for the forerunners, they're gonna have to figure it out and interact and think about that and things like these. These are things I'm really excited about putting in there.
Well, I think I totally agree. The illusion of choice. I guess my father used to say something to me all the time, and well, it's going to be some naughty language, but and basically what he used to tell me is that you can bullshit the fans, but you can't bullshit the players. And he used to talk about football a lot. He was a professional football player. His nickname was the battering ram. But anyway, that's a sideshow. I love my father. Wish he was here. He passed away while I was working on Eternal Darkness. But when you say you're going to do narrative-driven things, one of the problems with these studios is it's really hard to get people to believe in what you're doing, that truly believe, that truly resonates, and you get the people in the key positions what they're trying to do. And I hope that people see that Jack's a believer. I'm certainly a believer. All the stories that I've written and all the narratives, and Jack, you can probably attest to this by working with me now, I guess for a few months, but I'm a structure and big picture guy. I'll be like, this is what we're doing over here. This is this empire over here. This is this empire over here. And I'll go super fast, and you'll be like, whoa. What about this detail? Well, this detail? Well, yeah. We'll do this. But Jack and I think, are working together as we're updating the Necro Libriatus, Liberitas, as it's now, we've corrected it spelling correctly with the right Latin. I think these details really are going to come into play. And I'm not a big fan of sleight of hand. You're going to find with myself and Jack, we believe in what we're doing, and we're not here. We don't have the time. Look, I'm old enough now. I've done games for 30 years. I've seen some huge highs, some very deep lows. If people are going to yell at me, I've heard it before. If people are going to praise me, I've heard it before. And what we're really trying to do is make something that makes a difference in the video game industry, and we really truly believe, and there's people at Apocalypse that also believe that. And all the things that we're doing, I guess it's just not a verbal masturbation of trying to get you to either buy a founder's pack or something like that. What we're really trying to do is make a difference in the way people play games and how they're engaged. And I think that hopefully that comes through in either of these and all the things that we're doing. But we have an opportunity here to do something different. And when it comes to making choice matter, imagine being in the first age. You're going to have opportunities that other people will never have, because once the first stage is over, people won't be able to come back. That history will be the history of these cities. This vampire came in here, created this many progeny. This race came in and did this. This banshee came in and did this. And that's going to be the history. And we're going to build that history just like human history, where there's going to be a mountain of information that if people want to dive into can. And then at the same time, we're going to combine that with the deep social media integration on top of that, with giving people eventually, this is the longest pillar that's way out there, is allowing everyone here to actually create content for the game.
Yeah, I would say that Right. It's not from a lot of companies. It does come from an empty promise kind of a thing, insofar as they know it's what people want, and maybe they really intend. Maybe they start out with the intention our choices will impact, but as they go along, they realize, wow, this takes a lot of time to set up properly, and they have to scale it back, and that's why you get things where ultimately, let's just say hypothetically, not that a game would ever do something like this, but hypothetically, you end up making really significant, you believe, very significant choices, and then you find out in the ending of the game, all that really they change is the color of the particle effect, for example. Just in a pure hypothetical situation that would never happen.
Well, these kind of things can happen, quite frankly, when you have some visionaries in the game, but doesn't translate to other people. And you have designers that, man, I just got to get my job done. What do I need to do to get this job done? And when that starts happening, it's very difficult. And when you get to large scale companies, the possibility of that happening increases exponentially. So one of the things we're doing at Apocalypse, we're going to try to keep the team small as possible. And Silicon Knights, I think, was at 230 people. BioWare was like thousands. I look at some of the bigger studio games, and I don't want to name names, but they're just so generic, and that is a side effect of having a huge team. You just can't have you just can't have a level of buy-in that you can have with a small team. So I guess we'll see. Time will tell how successful this is. But I think over looking at 30 years of making games in the industry, I think we're onto something with Deadhaus Sonata, and I hope everyone else believes that as well. And spread the word as much as you can. But I guess we're not here to please everyone. So we're not gonna, because there's going to be some stuff that people are going to go, that's pretty nasty, but we like it, and it's going to be thought provoking. And just like I said to Miyamoto-san when he said to me, all these people are going to die in eternal darkness. Don't you want to make people happy? And my response was like, nope, I don't want to make people happy. I said, you're better at making people happy than I am. You should continue to make those games. I just want to make people remember and have it leave an impression. And that's what we're going to be doing with Deadhaus. So.
Yes, and continuing in this vein, a lot of the I saw someone mentioning how are we going to know the choices, etc. You can rest assured. I'm a very, let's say, driven person. I will obsess over it. I will be up until all hours of the night. There are times where I will spring awake at 2 a.m. with an idea and start frantically texting Dennis. Oh my God, what if we did this? And he's usually up. He's like, yeah, okay.
I answer. That's the curse.
Yeah. And this is something I've wanted to see in a game for a long, long time, because I love narrative-driven games, and I play them, and I get really excited when it's done well, and I get disappointed when they fail, and I think, if only a game would do it this way. And now we can make a game do it this way, and I'll do everything I can to make sure that happens. Speaking of choice, once again, of course, it's untenable that every single choice, let's say in a dialogue wheel in the game, has some game-changing impact. That's not tenable. Would probably be absurd. But if they're not going to make at least somewhat significant changes, they at least have to be interesting. That's the rule. It can't be 3 different ways to say yes to something. It at least has to allow for characterization or give you some lore or things like this. Puzzle out little pieces of information that you use later. Another really important aspect of a decision making system that will be part of this game that we absolutely will not be doing, and I think this is so important, is no morality system. That this is in my view, this crushes the potential of choice-driven games. And you can think of it You can think of it in Coder. You can think of it in Mass Effect with Paragon and Renegade. You can think of it in Fable when you get the horns or the halo. To me, Dennis mentioned we're not trying to preach to anyone. To expand on that, there's no. I feel like a lot of any work of art, not just a game, but any music or anything, is superior when the artist does not inject their agenda into it. When the artist gets out of their own way of the work of art. Uh, so a lot of times choices, I would find choices in the Mass Effect series where it would be really compelling, and I would just have to like set the controller down and step away and like pace around my room. One of them for 2 days. I was like, what would I, and it just like made me start thinking about life and philosophy. And I'm like, what would I do? And the really compelling thing about it to me was that there was no right answer. Now, I'm not a relativist. I think that's too far in the other direction as well. But the compelling choices are ones where there's a price to pay either way. There are upsides and downsides either way, and life is really complicated like that. Right? Like to me, that makes the most powerful, compelling stories is you emulate life. And I remember finally making this decision in Mass Effect in one of the quests, and as soon as I did, it went Renegade, and I'm like, oh, it just takes the soul right out of it because it's the developers saying you've been a bad boy, and it was so cool up until that point, and we will never do that. There's no morality scale slider. There's not morality gear that some will do it. It's just it's a canvas. The world is a canvas, and you're going to use all the colors at your disposal, and whatever you're going to make is going to be beautiful, but it's going to be messy.
It's definitely going to be messy, and philosophically, I would say we're going to take a Greek. Is it Greek? The mind, body, soul, sort of humanistic approach to everything with no judgments, knowing that we're not going to try to say what a good soul or a bad soul is, but we're going to say that it exists, and we're going to say your mind, you have to think, and then we're going to have the physical. And if you look at the trinary archetype system, it's built from the ground up to do that. And this goes all the way back to Blood Omen Legacy of Kain. When I first started talking about the Unforgiven, when I saw Unforgiven, and I'm like, this is the type of game we need to do. Who's bad? Is Clint Eastwood, his character, bad? Is he good? How about Little John? All of these characters have a perspective, and no one wants to truly be good, everyone wants to be good. No one truly wants to see themselves as bad. But there are decisions that you have to make in life, and we all know, I think especially with this pandemic, who's to say what we're doing is good or bad? I look at it from a perspective of we really need to examine what motivates people, what comes down to, and again, why I like Legati is he focuses on philosophical horror. So we're going to put you in some philosophically very difficult situations where there is going to be no right answer. And those type of things, I think, that's why I think Legati is so ahead of the curve when it comes to writing in horror. I think he's the best writer of our time right now. And, we're certainly under his shadow, but we're going to try to do some things in this medium that approaches things. So we think story is really important. We're going to drive that home, and we're going to try to do some things that are, quite frankly, I've been told a few times already, you're totally insane, get lost, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm like, all right, whatever. But the great thing is I was told that about Kain and Eternal Darkness, so it all worked out in the end. So hopefully it'll work out in this situation. So
yeah, and again, this is not to say that there are no choices in which there is a clear right and a clear wrong answer. There are. It's just those aren't compelling choices to be placed in. It's not that's another thing that a lot of these games let you play the villain, and it's really a shallow understanding of evil because nobody in the history of the world ever thinks they're the villain. Nobody wakes up and goes, "I'm the bad guy." That's terrible writing. That's not reflective. They believe in what they're doing. So it's this level of complexity is required to make a choice interesting. Otherwise, it's a non-choice. It's again, this is another form of, there are many trap paths that lead to the illusion of choice. But I think that's good on choices. Another one of the things, and this is a rough segue, but another one of the things that I wanted to talk about was being narrative driven. Class identity is really, really important in this game, and there's a lot of ways to convey that. A lot of people, it's interesting, when people pick characters in RPGs, I came to notice they choose for different reasons, and some of them pick because they like the look of it, the aesthetic, the overall art. Maybe they're an artistic minded person and they're like, I just really like the look of it. Some of them are munchkins or min-maxers, and they're doing it purely from spreadsheet based, and there's nothing wrong with that. This one has the most DPS. I can squeeze out 0.5 more DPS and be at the top of the meters. Some people, and I suspect that there are a lot of them in our fan base, choose characters in RPGs because they are looking at them as potential expressions of identity. In a way, they're almost looking for their own identity. And when they look at these characters, they think, and in a kind of literary minded way, which one do I most identify with? And they'll kind of start building these storytelling things in their own mind. And that's how I've always picked characters. So it's fascinating to me when the game actually does some work there past the character selection screen. It's always disappointing when you've got this selection, you've got the wizard and the warrior and all these, and you put all this thought into it, and you jump into the game, and you're just savior of humanity 4050. That's it. That's the role you play. And there are a few ways that I'm really excited about deviating from this, about making class identity. Class identity is being thought of in so many layers right now. We're currently, and I won't give away anything, but we're currently working on combat flow sequences and animations and things like that for the vampire. And every single movement is thought of as, how would he do this differently? How would a vampire do this? What to set him apart? What does it mean? We want that in all elements of the character, but within terms of narrative, one of the ways is absolutely class-specific quests. Obviously, there'll be a million quests that anyone can do, but there will be a class quest storyline. And you could think of Star Wars: The Old Republic as being one example of this, certainly insofar as your friends being able to observe your choices and things like that. That was one thing they did really, really cool. And it was something that sometimes, early WoW did it. You were the Warlock, for example, and your class trainer was in, if you were Alliance, your class trainer was in the basement of a tavern called the Slaughtered Lamb, and you were like secretively hiding out there. And to get new demons, when you got to be a certain level, you had to go hunt down regents out in the world, and one of them was like the heart of a pure man, to lure in a succubus, and like you had to actually call the demon with this ritual for the first time and enslave it. So freaking cool. I loved that. It made you feel like a warlock. And then later, it was just, you hit 20, you get a succubus. Boom, there it is. And I was like, no, why take that out? That was so cool. Definitely want to keep that. Definitely want to have aspects like that in this one.
Yeah, I think I can only speak for myself, I guess. I always pick characters, not necessarily who I want to be, but what I want to represent in the game. So sometimes I'll go really crazy this way, this other way crazy. But as far as the narrative goes, we're going to be doing, what's the right word? Origin stories. Yes. So how you actually became the type of character that you are. That's going to be cool. It's going to be unique, hopefully for every person. And then at the same time, it's going to weave in the lore. I remember, this is just a relative story. It's pretty funny. So my wife, Joanne, not a horror fan. I don't know why she's married to me, but she likes romantic comedies, which I hate. Um, anyway, um, Rev, uh, one of the cats, because we have 6 cats in the house now, we called Revenant in the office. We named after the Revenant. She finally she asked me yesterday, what does a Revenant mean? And I said, well, it's a character animated back from the dead because of extreme hatred and malice. And she goes, you named Revenant? And I went, but he's so cute. And I'm like, yeah, I love him. But yeah, that's his name. And she's like, we got to rename him. He's too cute to be I'm like, but names mean something. Origin stories mean something. And that story resonates to me is that we have to make these things meaningful for gamers. And whether it comes to the origin story of banshees, wraiths, revenants, and quite frankly, I have to say the amount of work we've put into the banshee lore is quite original. I haven't seen anything like it. I think it builds off of what we have historically throughout many cultures, but we've put this interesting twist on it within our universe that I think is really going to be appealing. And I've been watching people, I think with Seven Sons and Twilight, try to break down some of the things. People are almost there. They're not all the way there, but they're close. They're really picking up on some things. And I think we're creating this universe that's going to be very deep and well worthwhile when it comes to exploration and examination. And when I see articles like someone posted The Escapist talking about how my writing combined with Amy's helped create an interesting, character set with Blood Omen Legacy of Kain, I think, Jack, the stuff that we're doing together will resonate in hopefully equally or more profound ways than what people saw in Blood Omen Legacy of Kain.
Yes, I don't want to give anything away about the Banshee, but we did base it off of the old legends because in any instance that the old legends are available, we're using those as a foundation we're making sure that our creations are grounded in them because it's fascinating. The concept of take vampires, for example. Every culture in the world you could think of has some vampire legend. And you go back, they didn't talk to each other to come up with this, but several of them came up with this idea of this creature, and it was connected to death, and it fed on blood. That's fascinating. Now, of course, you can be a conspiracy theorist and say, well, they must have been vampires at one point in time, and no one can prove that wrong, right? The way that it interests me is this speaks to something about the innate condition of being human. This is an archetypal manifestation of something in our minds. And that's why that gives it power. I mean, you can see archetypal patterns in stories, in the hero's journey, for example. And so many stories, cultures have stories like that. What it is about, monsters are archetypes in our minds. And I feel that makes them really compelling. So we make sure to ground and pull from that old legends to resonate with that power. And we did this with Banshees, and our very own Golden Zan was helpful in this endeavor because he essentially aggregated an enormous amount of Banshee lore from lots of different authors and things. And he made a post, Golden, if you link it in the chat, you'll know the one I'm talking about, that talks about different cultures and different variations of banshees and things like this. And there are even some, it's fun to think of the cousins, I would call them, or things, mythological things that have for some reason share these conditions. Like, for example, a siren. There's a slight relation to a banshee, say, but they're associated with water. They're women. They have a song, and they are omens of death. And so you start to think about the components, the archetypal components that make up this monster, and build from that and apply where we can, kind of, let's say, Lovecraftian twists. And that's what we're doing with the Banshees lore. And I think she's really cool. I think they're all, I think they're all really cool. Of course, I suppose I'm biased.
I'm linking it here. I'm not sure if Golden can link in the forums, but I think that's the right. I just did a quick search. I think that's the right one for everyone to take a look at. Yeah, I agree. And I think the community so far has been so overwhelmingly amazing and contributing to what we're doing. Does that make Jack Team Banshee?
My job is to be team all of them. I have to
Yeah.
represent them all to the best of my ability to make them all cool. That's what I got to do.
Yeah, the Banshees are pretty cool though. I
I
have
got
to
to
admit.
each single one. I have to look at like it's the coolest one when I'm making
Yeah.
it. So
Well, what we've done with the Banshee, which I particularly like, is we've melded the traditional foundation of Banshees from Irish lore. Obviously, Ireland has, I would say, the lion's share of, if not all of the lore from the Banshee, and combined it with the Lovecraftian mythos. Would you agree with that, Jack?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So there's some interesting things there.
And you mentioned Origin Quests. I'm so pumped for Origin Quests. I love that. That was my favorite part of Dragon Age Origins was the Origin Quests. They were so compelling because I get so tired of being the savior of the world. I don't want to save the world. I don't care. That is
Saving
the
the world is so boring. It's boring.
It's
It's
also
been done a million
patronizing.
times.
It's
Yeah, it's like
patronizing because it's like how do we get our players invested in our world? Oh, well, we'll tell them it all will blow up if they don't do X. Then they'll have to be invested. It's brute force immersion. And I
yeah,
refuse. I reject it. I never in The Witcher, for example, The Witcher 3, I didn't care about the Frost. I didn't care about finding Ciri. I wanted to be a Witcher. I wanted to travel around to different towns and haggle for what my surfaces were gonna. That was really cool. In Dragon Age, the dwarf noble, he was my favorite. It was so fun, and I played them all. I played them all starting out and being these different, and then of course, once you get to the end of it, now you're just the Grey Warden. Now you're the savior of humanity, and I'm like, no. Later they bring it back in a little bit, but I am fascinated by origin stories. It ties into class quests. Absolutely, there will be origin stories, and if you want hints about what those origin stories, the direction that we're thinking in them, read the class descriptions, because very likely these origin stories will be revolved around how because I don't want to say I don't want to. I'm gonna be careful to not give anything away, but it's essentially a lot of it is how you became what you are. So
yeah.
for one
And
really vague example, uh, liches start off as very competent mortal spellcasters that are achieving immortality through these means. So an origin quest ostensibly would begin as an actual human mage, and you're transitioning into lich, the metamorphosis over time, and you can like it just gets my mind the wheels turning. Like you can set up all these threads, right? Like because if that took like place like 1,000 years ago or whatever, and you can the choices that you made back then, and then you find them thousands of years later, it just such cool stuff to yeah.
yeah, I agree. It. I guess I can say I've never really said this before, but the whole idea of Legacy of Kain in the ending, choose whether you save the world or just burn it to the ground. I think statistically, most people are like, let's just burn it to the ground because it was either in character with Kain or. But I think that more than anything speaks to your point, Jack, of um, Kain never wanted to save the world. He didn't consider himself a good person. He didn't consider himself a bad person, but he was more of a victim of circumstance, which I think we find are. I think it's very easy for most people to find themselves in this situation, and especially when you look at today's world with COVID and all of those different things, from a standpoint of how do we define ourselves, there are many things out of our control, but we want to give a realistic um, a vector of engagement for everyone. So I guess in some level, if you want to burn the world to the ground, we'll allow that. But at the same time, if you want to further the pursuit of truth, then you can't do that because burning it to the ground erases the truth in many ways.
Yeah.
You're destroying history, just like So I have to say this. I find it very frustrating that I guess censorship in some sense is counterproductive and works against what people are trying to do. As an example, I'll say this from a perspective. When I look at a war game on RTS where you're dealing with World War II, where they have to remove all the swastikas from the German tanks, when it was historically accurate to have swastikas on, I do not understand why you're removing those. I understand that it's very offensive to people, that the Nazi swastika represents very bad things. I agree with that, 100%. But if you start removing that from history, people will forget about it and forget why it's bad. So we're going to take a real honest approach at things, and is it going to offend some people? Probably. But it's going to be hopefully a truthful approach on how we see the world from a perspective of, again, not being patronizing. We're not going to tell you anything about ethics. That's not our job. We're not your judge. We are here to give you a playground to play in. We're going to try to explore the truth, which is very, very difficult philosophically. Knowing that it's difficult philosophically, we're going to attempt at it. And where Ligotti created philosophical horror, we're creating a philosophical playground for you to engage and immerse yourself into this dystopian world where many people believe it's better to be dead than alive. And how did the world get there? How did we get to the place that we're at? And I feel, I have to say, people aren't going to see some of these things until March now, but some of the things we're working on are just very, very interesting. And they remind me of these big philosophical questions of when I first started reading science fiction and horror and fantasy, of what does this really mean? What are the foundations of us as human beings? And knowing that none of us can be judges. I can't judge Jack. I don't expect Jack to judge me. Though people are very judgmental in this world, that's not the goal of what we're trying to do. We're trying to allow people to think these things through in a digital setting to evolve. So hopefully evolve yourself. Every time I've always tried to create a game, whether it be Blood Omen, Legacy of Kain, To Human, Eternal Darkness, Metal Gear Solid, all of these things. I'm a big believer in, I guess, the epiphany that I got after reading Shakespeare. Just to be clear, when I went through high school, English was one of my worst subjects. I was very math orientated, comp sci. Thought English was, quite frankly, a joke. Didn't do well in one class, and I guess in grade 11, the English teacher, who didn't like me very much, I used to wrestle, and she gave me zeros when I go on wrestling tournaments. She wouldn't let me, if I wasn't there for the test, I get a zero. So I ended up failing that class, and I had to take it with an instructor who actually motivated me and turned me on to the lyrics of Rush, Shakespeare, and I saw the magic in the different layering of the philosophical content of, being able to speak philosophical metaphors for the aristocracy in the balconies and telling dirty jokes for those people who were sitting in the front rows, and trying to appeal to all people through subtlety and effort. And I think those things are worth pursuing, and it's a voice. I actually, just so everyone knows, Jack, I hope it's okay that I tell this story. Is it okay I tell your story of how you came to Apocalypse? Are you okay with that or no?
Sure. Sure.
Okay. So Jack and I were working together briefly. We connected through exclusively games, of course. And Jack was always like, hey, I was giving him a little bit of writing work, and I was like, look, we're pretty small right now. I don't know if I can, I could. I was like, right now we have to keep the team small. We're very constrained on budget and things like that. Jack's like, okay, no problem. And one day he sent me a picture of Niagara Falls, New York, which is literally 15 minutes away from here. And he goes, hey, I just moved. And Jack was from Georgia. That was so inspiring for me that I'm like, man, I just finished telling this guy, not yet, soon, I promise. As soon as I can, I will bring you on board. And he moved. I don't know how many, it said 2,000 miles. That's a lot of
900.
Nah, it's a long trip. And so for those who know me, I'm very inspired by not what people say, having a golden tongue myself. I know that people can speak and not talk the talk, but not walk the walk. And regardless of Jack being very eloquent and being a fantastic writer, talking about very deep things, talking about bringing the voices back from, Eternal Darkness and Legacy of Kain that are now missing from the industry. The guy just moved like 1,000 miles to say, I'm ready whenever you are. And that is the kind of people that we need working on Apocalypse. And I think in the community, we have people equally as well who are buying founders packs at $500+ during a pandemic that I can't say how much we really appreciate it. And the only thing, knowing how this project is going and being super happy about the progress that we're making, I will say the following. I can promise that we will pay back heart and soul what everyone's putting in from the community. And Jack, you've come in now are playing a huge role, and it just blew me away what you did. And these things are very rare, and these things are things that move me. I've seen a lot in my time, and I think that we're onto something special. We've got magic in a bottle here, and we're going to take it home. So anyway, I don't know where I started, but this is where I ended up. So I hope that was okay.
Yeah, it was back in February. And it was, I was talking to Dennis. I knew about this game, and I was super, super excited for it. And I'd asked him, hey, if you're hiring writers, I know you're going to expand the team. I'm doing narrative design for this other project. I'd like to throw my hat in. And like he said, he's like, yeah, well, maybe this, maybe that in the future. And I thought, I can sit around here and wait. What do I do? Do I sit and I wait? I wait to be told the door to my dream is open, or do I go after it as a test of faith?
Once you did that, how long did it? Like, I know we met. I went over because you didn't have your passport at the time, so I went over and met. We went out for dinner a couple of times and just kind of chilled and talked and met in person before COVID. But it was 2 months at most before I said, okay, I'm just going to hire you right now full time.
Yeah. And it's like he said, there was no promise of it when I went north. I just took only what would fit in my car and just gave the rest away and drove 900 miles. I only stopped for gas to somewhere I didn't know anyone, to a little apartment in the dead of winter up north. And I just messaged him one day, and I said, hey, you like this street I'm living on now? And he was like, your reaction was some not nice language, but it was the excitement.
Oh, I think I was like, WTF? Is this real?
Yeah.
Because just so everyone knows, I'm 15 minutes away from the U.S. border, and being in a border town in Niagara, as when I was a teenager, would go over Buffalo chicken wings. Like, we're close to Buffalo, amazing. So go over to the U.S. One of my favorite restaurants is an Italian restaurant called Como's. It's in Little Italy in Niagara Falls, New York. My mother and I've gone there for over 50 years. My mother's gone there for probably 70 years. And that's where I'd meet Jack just to have meals, and because it's just like really good Italian food, and the people there are, I'm half Italian, and these guys are the real deal. And I was just moved, so it blew me away. So that's how Jack got here. He did it on his own, and had I guess in some level we played a part in it, but I think it was all Jack more than anything. So.
Yep, and then I got stuck with the lockdown for 6 months.
Then when we hired you, we're like, okay, get over here, and you couldn't.
Yeah. But I finally now, that's why I got the flag going. That's right. 12 days ago, I got across the border. and
Yeah.
I am finally here now. And in 2 days, I get to go outside.
2 more days of quarantine and then you're good to go. So, well, we're lucky right now in Ontario. COVID's pretty low. I don't know what's going to happen in October, November. I'm pretty concerned about it because in the hot weather in the summertime, those things generally for COVID viruses, I know COVID-19 is a little different, but generally they don't survive well in the summer. But I guess we're going to find out what the winter is going to be like. So, but Canada right now is pretty good. So hopefully that will continue. And I just hope that everyone can stay safe. This is such a messed up time. And, seeing all the delays, I guess another game was delayed today as well. I guess Halo just got delayed or something like that. And I'm surprised the consoles aren't delayed, quite frankly. I thought the consoles would be delayed too. I guess we'll see.
But not Deadhaus.
Well, Deadhaus got delayed. We already delayed it by a bit. But there might be a new badge on the forums. But, maybe I shouldn't have said that. I guess we'll have to post and talk about that another time. So.
Yeah. Well, I think we covered most of what we set out to.
I think so. So are there any questions before we call? Hopefully, I guess looking at the chat, are these the direction that we're going in, focusing a lot on Deadhaus? We're going to have narrative streams every month, and then every month have a different type of stream, whether it be concept work or, actual showing off the build, showing gameplay, designs, interface. Are watching artists work for a stream? Are these things that people want to see? Let us know in the chat if this is a good sign.
There are also a couple of questions that we got too, Dennis.
Oh, okay. Let's answer those questions before we go.
One didn't get posted into the Discord, but I remember it, and then one is in the Discord.
Okay, here it is from Faceless Mike. Hey, Faceless Mike, thanks for joining us today. Will we get to die in Legacy of Kain, or will we start afterwards? Oh, I see. I guess he's asking, will we? Oh, I just went to a screensaver mode. Will we? Oh, I'm looking at Nagaztech there. Oh, that's coming. Will we? Spoiler alert. This is not coffee. Will we die at the beginning of the game like Legacy of Kain? Will that be part of the origin stories? Jack, I'll let you take that one.
Yes, for the most part, yes. I think death is a really important part of the transition to the undead, right? I think that was really cool in Blood Omen when you did that. And of course, it'll be different depending on what kind of undead you are. As those of you who've read the class descriptions are well aware, each of the undeads have a very unique way of being born or unborn or whatever you want to call it. So it will be part of the origin quest, will be that transition.
Yeah. I think there's going to be some very interesting things. Oh, we've got another question that just came in. In the Lich's class description, there is lesser undead mentioned. I assume those are zombies, skeletons, for example. Can we probably expect the Lich to be able to play in necromantic playstyle? How much control will we expect to have in terms of being able to command minions, the Lich, and otherwise? I guess summoner class kind of question.
Well, it does say that in the class description. It says he can command lesser undead. Now, what those are exactly, maybe we'll keep that a little bit secret for now, but I assure you, I'm putting a lot of thought into Diablo 2. My favorite class was the Necromancer. So freaking cool.
It's everyone's favorite class. Who doesn't want to play the Necromancer? And when I heard in Diablo 4, they killed all the Necromancers, I was like, what are you doing? Stop doing that. Diablo 3, give me my Necromancer. Diablo 4, I want my Necromancer. Sorry. Did I say that out loud?
I've met people who others were their favorites, but God, I almost just want to tell them about this skill that I thought of because it's so freaking cool.
Go ahead. Doesn't matter. It's a small crowd.
Okay.
Everyone who's paying attention now, it's such a small group, so let's do it.
All right, so yeah, so Necromancer, first of all, coolest class in Diablo. I remember you're standing around the fire, you click the class, and they step forward and they do something. You know, the paladin strikes a pose, the barbarian goes, bah! I remember when then you click on the Necromancer, he just walks forward and just holds his hands up, and you see the blue flames wreath him, and I was just like, that is the cool. How could you pick anything else? So there are skills that I'm delving into old stories and lores and legends and things like this in terms of his ability to summon, his ability to use necromancy. The word necromancy, it's very fitting, means divining from death, which is essentially gaining truth, hidden truth from death. Like a pyromancer would be divining truth from the flames, like looking into fire to see oracles linguistically. So they're very well be elements of that. But in terms of summoner, so I'm like, I don't want him to summon skeleton warriors. That's too cliche at this point. Everyone's done it, and I want to do something that's cooler than that. So, and now the iteration that I'm explaining to you now may change, but one of them is an ability called Zombify, where essentially he will, whatever the animation is, he points at a corpse or whatever. If it's a viable corpse, have a cool little sound effect like I think it's called like a water harp or a water phone, like strike down when he, and then if it's a viable corpse, it rises up as a zombie version of itself, and then enemies that it strikes down in combat rise up as zombie versions of themselves, so that you get eventually a Night of the Living Dead scenario where your army is clawing people down, and eventually you've got a huge mass of them. Obviously, we'll have to put a lot of thought into balancing on that, but I'm like, to me, that's straight out of a horror movie. And that would feel really, really cool to be behind that, to watch your slowly growing zombie horde just overwhelm the forces of the living and try to hold up against it.
That's why I am so excited that we're working together. So when Jack and I first started talking, Jack was like, I'm not sure I like the design of this. And I'm like, yeah, I hate it actually. And he was like, well, what direction do you want to go in? And I said, have you ever seen this movie called 13 Ghosts? And you were like, yes, I love that. I love the movie. Isn't awesome, but the design of the ghosts, the most recent remake, and the older one is of course classic horror. We very much align on those kind of things, and you're going to see a lot more 13 Ghosts coming out in our game design. I think people are really going to see that more and more. And when I'm looking at some of I guess, Jack, when we're talking about some of the customizations for the vampire class, as we're iterating on that and some of the Revenant class, that's going to be the bomb. Mm-hmm. I just look at that, and I guess I dated myself by saying that, but I'm an old guy trying to be cool, but that shit is pretty awesome. I look at that and I'm just like, yes! And most people would look at it like, can we have some good-looking characters? Or like, I guess so, maybe.
There are two more questions. One that we skipped a little bit before.
All right.
It says, will humans be aware of the gods that Deadhaus worships? Will they have their own gods, or will they think the dead are just crazy? I saw when this question came up in the chat that Golden Zan had some good deductive reasoning about that. He pointed out that there's an area on the map that mentions the Crimson Sign. So presumably there are humans at least that know about that god, possibly others. That's right. That's close enough to knowing the answer to that. They at least know about some of the gods, at least. And then we have another new one that says, do we have any say over who we were before death? If so, to what degree? To which I would say the answer to that would be absolutely. That is what would come out in your origin quest let's just take the list, for example, as you're starting as this immortal caster, the interactions that you have with your fellow academy people and wherever these will build your characters. I like the idea of, in some games you pick your background, you just pick it, like, oh, I was a pirate. Like Mass Effect, for example. Was I a military commander? Was I a spacer? And that's cool. That's fine. I think it'd be cool to do something like that through a form of storytelling. Like, for example, you're in a situation, you guys are sitting around the fire or whatever, and somebody asks you as let's say if someone asks you as a vampire, who your story, who turned you, whatever, or like I don't know if you ever watched Shadow of the Vampire. There's a scene like that where they're sitting around and they're asking him, and he's Willem Dafoe, who is just perfectly cast for that because he looks like a monster already. Uh, Talks about and all he says is it was a woman, and they're like, oh, now we're getting somewhere. But like I can imagine a wheel of chat options when you're asked something about your past that you're then telling the story, and you haven't played it yet, but by you picking that, that's what it becomes, and elements open up later. So that'd be a cool, interesting way to, yeah.
Yeah, agreed. We're on the same page. We have another question. This is so apropos because we're literally talking about this today.
Yep.
Are we having executions in Deadhaus Sonata? I'm not sure how hard it would be to implement the mechanic, but I believe mechanics like this have a whole lot of theme. And we're like, hell yeah, we're having Mortal Kombat style executions that should be very thematic.
Yeah, I'm really excited about those.
Yeah.
I remember this is another thing that a lot of games or developers will be hesitant about or worried about, like, oh, we can't be too gory or whatever. We get to be gory, and it's going to be so fun. It's going to be so cool.
We're going to keep going. I guess our theme is going to be, we're going to keep pushing it till federal authorities tell us to stop.
Yeah.
And we're in Canada, so we're pretty I don't know. I guess it's hard to say. Canada's a little different than most places, but we can do a lot of things here. So,
yeah. Another one asks, can the Lich control minions down to the individual zombie level, or will it be more pact based with the Necromancer? This is definitely in the yet to be determined phase. The skills are largely conceptual now, and just beginning to be tied into the framework of the language that's being written for them, the coding language. So we'll have to sort this out. We start with an idea that's tied to lore, and we go from there.
Yeah, I guess just to add to what Jack's saying, we're taking a very foundational and systematic approach. So to do necromancy and to do spells as the Lich, there is a certain rituals that you have to go through that are not the nicest, but very pragmatic, and will help define that. But in general, for those who know the history of the games that I've made, I'm a big strategy guy, and the idea of formations, strategical formations of leaders, tanks, all of those kind of things you're going to start to see in Deadhaus. You're not going to see any of that. We haven't spent any time on the AI right now, but you're going to start to see formations, leaders, front row, shield walls, casters in the background. These are the kind of things I would like to see for the Necromancer as well. So you'll be able to do something that's fairly systematic, and the whole idea of controlling these things, if you're going to go down to the individual level, would it make sense, or would you want to control a particular group, whether it be a skirmisher group or whether it be a berserker group that just goes in and starts melee attacking as you have another group somewhere else firing missiles. There's all kinds of ways. I look at it like a big RTS. So that's how, philosophically, that's how we're going to approach this problem.
And there are so many possibilities. Some may not be controllable. Some maybe investing points further into that tree gains you more control where you wouldn't have normally. Golden Dan asks a question that the answer is going to have to be a mystery for now. Who are the Templar of the Ashen Ring? Why are they so valued by the humans? Why did they?
I think he's asked me this in private chat, or I've seen this one come up before, maybe in on the forums. But yeah, how many secrets do you want us to give away, guys? That's the question.
These things will be spoken of more in time in the storytelling. A lot of times, it's almost more important sometimes what you don't say than what you do say, and I put a lot of thought into that toward the Chronicles. so that if you simply had that answer, it would take some of the weight out of the way that it's written. Sometimes for that.
Agreed. We have another one coming in for Cornson. From a design perspective, what class do you think will be the hardest to balance? That's a no-brainer, I think. But go ahead, Jack. Why don't you answer that
I think
one?
you're going to say the white would be my guess.
I am because it's so different. It's so different.
Yeah.
Yeah, the white for sure.
Which has to be completely remain a mystery right now. We've got one from Faceless Mike that says, could there be group-based finishers, like finishers that are done different based on what classes? You've talked about that before, Dennis.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And how about ultimates based on group ultimates as well?
Yeah.
I think if you're going to look at the gameplay of, say, Two Human versus Deadhaus Sonata, Two Human really mixed Diablo with Devil May Cry. And the problem with that philosophy is when you take Devil May Cry, where you have these intricate combos, when you have to deal with lag and latency on the internet, it is impossible to combine that kind of play style with other people who are on the internet. So essentially, you're doing all these cool combos, but it makes it a single player game because the lag and latency makes it impossible for other people to have that level of fidelity. So what we're going to do is, if you look at a game like League of Legends, where they have very, what I would say, simple but deep mechanics when it comes to combos and combo finishers, but they can all combine into something that's really, truly devastating. That's kind of the philosophical approach we're going to go towards these things. So accounting for the lag and latency that we're going to have with multiplayer games, these type of combos we really want to build upon, where if you have a finisher from a Revenant combined with a finisher from a Lich combined with a finisher from a Vampire, will be very different from something like a Banshee and a White and a Wraith, as an example. But we're going to keep them simple but deep, because we really want to make sure the gameplay is great. Until we get to the point, of course, where the internet incorporates quantum mechanics and we have quantum entanglement where there is no lag and latency, which apparently people are talking about right now, which would be awesome. But I've yet to see that theory come into practice. That would be amazing. But for now, as we deal with lag and latency, we have to make sure that our core combat system is simple but deep. Where I think that if I was to criticize Two Human, that's one of my big criticisms. Awesome combos, some that were too deep for many people even to follow. But when it came to multiplayer, you couldn't work with other people because of the lag and latency. So we'll try to fix that with Deadhaus.
Got one from Wyvern Tamer that says, will there be downtime activities like Whack-A-Ghoul, Pin-A-Bat, or Revenant arm wrestling, betting area, even just lore-wise? I would suspect that the answer is yes. That's something that will have to be carefully. Technically, crafting is a downtime activity. You think of it as a non-combat activity. So for at least immediately off the top of my head, that's one. And arm wrestling was mentioned. That's an example in The Witcher, right? But it makes sense lore-wise. You go to bars and arm wrestles. I bet you we could think of some lore-appropriate non-combat type things.
Yeah, I think one of the best games to do this is EVE Online, where they had their training skills constantly going 24 hours, whether you were playing or not. And I think taking, we all stand on the shoulder of giants, and taking some leads from those guys and incorporating some things that are just processing in the background as you play would be, pretty interesting. Like, say you want to do some research, you don't have time to play, you're going away on vacation. You'll say, hey, my vampire is going to go to this library and research for a while. I see no reason why we can't do some tasks that are what I would say real time and offline for the times when you're just not going to be able to play. And I think a good balance of that, EVE Online did that very well. If we could balance some of those things, would be things I'd like to see in the game as well.
Faceless Mike asks, will our player housing have lore-related implications? And if we can buy new or bigger ones in the item store, will they have lore implications?
I would say we're not doing our job if they're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something that's a little down the line yet. Thoughts on player housing, things like this.
Have you thought about adding cursed sentient weapons from Cornson? Of course we have. I think is the answer.
Magic abilities, get cursed items. fire spells due to. What is that second part? It says, will classes with low magical abilities get access to magic true cursed items? Like, for example, fire spells due to infernal creatures. I don't know if
I'm not sure I understand the context of that, but
that
I guess for some of the weapons, and I think some of the ideas we have behind sentient weapons are extremely interesting and can only be done in a persistent online universe. But I not knowing the contents, I think the answer default is yes. There needs to be positives and negatives with everything that we create. And if we create something that's just so powerful and just so awesome, it makes everything else that you have so less worth having. So like in life, there's a positive and negative associated with every aspect of what you do. So we're going to try to balance our entire game that way. If we ever create something that's just the best, if there's ever defined the best weapon in the game, I think we failed. We need to rebalance it and fix it.
Golden Zan asks, Alaric's of Vampires shows that vampires have some very strong weaknesses known and exploited by the humans in the sun, such as not being able to transform and generally moving slower. Will the sunlight be a frequent threat to the vampire? What other issues does the vampire face when exposed to light? Absolutely. The vampire has to pay attention to the sun. There's going to be a day-night cycle. There's actually going to be a really dynamic weather cycle in general, cosmological celestial phenomenon. I'm working with one of the artists right now on the moon phases and making sure those make sense in terms of what side of the moon, waxing crescent, waxing gibbous, waning, and the new moon and the full moon, and where does it appear in the sky and things like this. So sun is definitely going to be a problem for the vampire. The exact specifications of how it harms them, we're still deciding. But it's not like this is a modern convention where they step out into the sun and they burst into flames.
We're not having that.
Yeah, that's
we're not doing that.
Part of the old legends. The old legends, if you read them, they are weakened in the sun, but not destroyed.
We're gonna throw that away to Hollywood garbage. That is Hollywood garbage. No Hollywood garbage in Deadhaus Sonata. And if we ever do anything that's Hollywood garbage, please let us know. But we're saying no to Hollywood garbage.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I would say all the classes have to pay attention to the celestial bodies, just like in Legacy of Kain, where there's going to be celestial gates that will open depending on the month, the day, the year, the moon phase. Everyone has to pay attention. The vampire has some particular weaknesses in daylight, and you're going to want to plan your adventures at night as a vampire if you can. But if they go a little longer, you're going to run into trouble. So.
And I have actually made a calendar, a unique calendar because the world, Malorum, is not Earth. It does not orbit the sun, our sun. It does not have our moon. So it has its own months and days, and these are starting to be built as a framework for. We're going to have essentially a cosmological event map. There will be certain days where there are eclipses. There are certain celestial phenomenon, and the bones of that have already been laid now.
Yep, agreed. Agreed. And I think, I was going to say, I think this could be probably the last question for now. Let's, because I hopefully everyone's enjoyed the stream, but there'll be many more to come. So let's make this the last question, Jack.
Cornson says, what can we expect when it comes to manipulating NPCs? For example, can we spread lycanthropy through the villages? If you're going to take lycanthropy specifically as an example, I could see that possibly being as related to decisions involving a quest that somehow a werewolf is involved. Of course, none of the undead by their innate power have anything to do with lycanthropy. But insofar as your decisions intersect with the involvement of a werewolf and how you might handle a situation, that's plausible. I'm sure you're going to be able to cause a lot of chaos. Lycanthropy, you can switch this for variables like whether to poison a well or whether to assassinate a leader or bribe him and have him as an informant, or whether lots of different kind of things that will have cascading effects throughout the village and other villages.
Yep, agreed. Hopefully you can hear me. I just had a Bluetooth malfunction. So can you hear me, Jack?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. Yeah, so hopefully this is a good direction and people like where we're going. So over the next couple of weeks, streams will be less frequent, but we're going to start hitting, I would say within a month or so, a stream every week, hitting all these different types of genres, whether it be concepts, game design, looking at the builds, talking about narrative, or anything else. Jack, is that a good summary of where we're going?
Yeah, to begin with, and the work, like you mentioned, the demonstrable builds will be a little bit later, possibly around October. But we are going to slowly start rolling out this new structure and basically getting more directly developmentally related content in front of you guys. And I saw a lot of excitement about it earlier, so in the chat.
Hopefully everyone likes that. So, all right, everyone. So thanks for joining us here. We look forward to seeing everyone soon. Thanks for being here with Deadhaus Sonata. Spread the word, everyone. Check out, of course, Deadhaus Sonata on our website and join our forums, our discords, all of that fun stuff. And we look forward to seeing everyone on our next stream, which will be announced in the near future. Jack, do you have anything else you want to say?
I see some people saying after party. Give me a minute to.
Yes, let us have a bathroom break, and we will join the after party.
Yeah.
See everyone in the Discord for the after party. Absolutely.